Stay for the politics. I'm Ben Walsh, and this is Let's Meet Bread. This week on Let's Meet Bread, I am super happy to share with you a recipe for balzama, a Turkish bread. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our yeast mixture. I have some water here. It's about 105 degrees. And I have 2 tablespoons of yeast. Now I'm doubling this recipe, but I'm going to give instructions for as if you're making a single version of this recipe. So for everything except the yeast, if you're doubling it, you'll see me putting in twice as much, but you'll see me putting in twice as much, but I'll be giving a recipe for 1 serving. So this is going to be you're going to have about 150 milliliters of water, and we're just going to put our yeast. We're just going to put our yeast on top of here. Now, the recipe doesn't call for it, but I have actually included just a pinch of sugar. I find that adding sugar to yeast is a helpful way to make sure that your yeast is actually active. So let's get a fork real quick and just fluff this real quick. And so, just like we do every week, I'm going to do a nice little round motion in here, just trying to get the yeast a little bit mixed together. Remember, it's not going to come together all the way. That's all right. All right, so by the way, if you get yeast that sticks like this, just take your fingers. Your hands are clean, I'm sure. And you're just gonna let it go in there. All right, so we're gonna let that sit for 5 minutes. While we take care of some other stuff. Ooh, I got some extra yeast here. It's just, come on, in you go. Look alive, yeast. All right. Sorry about that. So the next thing we are going to do while we're letting this, forgot to cover it. So we're going to cover this and set it aside so that it can bloom. That's the way. I'm actually really excited to make this bread because when I traveled to Turkey, I actually had this bread a lot, but I had no idea what it was called. I definitely didn't know how to make it. So I'm really excited to take a crack at this and to make this bread. And actually what we're going to do with this bread, so typically this is like a dinner bread or a bread that you make and then eat right away. So what we're going to do in order to preserve it, because I think it's important that this show helps you make bread for an entire week. So part of the reason I'm doubling the recipe is so that I have enough of these, because one recipe makes 6, the 2 recipes I'm making will make 12. I'm going to make one of them on camera for you. I'm not going to make all 12 on camera. Once you see how it's done, you'll be able to replicate it, and I won't need to take any more of your time. But what we're going to do for this is I'm only going to show you how to dress one of them. And then every other one that I make, instead of dressing it in olive oil and herbs, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it sit to the side and cool to room temperature. Once it's room temperature, what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to put it in a Ziploc bag, or if you can use plastic wrap or foil or whatever you want. Just make sure it's nice and tight and you can get some kind of air seal in there. And then I'm just going to set the bread aside, and then whenever I want it, what I'll do is I'll reheat it on the cast iron real quick, just hot enough so that it takes to the oil and spices. And then just as if you had made it just then, you'll just take your oil and spices, you'll paint it on just as if you had made it just then, and then it's fresh to eat as if you had just made it in that moment. But this way, you can save it for another time. Say you want to have balzama a couple days from now, you can make it now, just not dress it, and then just make sure that you can have a moment to reheat it on a hot skillet before you do that. Speaking of hot skillets, I have my cast iron out here. We're going to be using our cast iron to make one. I'm actually going to demonstrate how to make one of these on camera for you. Your cast iron will need to be very hot. That being said, if you have a fire alarm or if you have people who get nervous by high heat, you want to keep them away, and you want to make sure that your fire alarm is paid attention to. And if for some reason I have to run off camera or you hear a loud beeping, it's because my fire alarm will be going off. Unfortunately, it's very sensitive, so these recipes sometimes do set the alarm off. But we'll do our best to mitigate that and not have to worry about it. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do, and I'm very excited to make this with you. So let's see how our yeast is doing. I've got a really nice layer already. We got about 2 minutes left. Perfect. Okay. So what we're gonna do now is I have 500 grams of flour here. I'm just gonna put this in our bowl here. And we're going to combine this with our milk. Now, our milk needs to be room temperature. If your milk is right out of the fridge or you forgot to set it for room temperature, don't worry. Just put it in the microwave for about 20 seconds, okay? That's going to bring it to what about room temperature is. And luckily for this recipe, it doesn't really matter if your milk is warm. You just don't want your milk hot. Again, it really shouldn't change things, but it's important to have it at room temperature just to make sure there's no extra stuff going on with the chemistry. So I have 150 milliliters of milk here, and we're just going to pour this into our flour mixture here. Set this aside. All right, so the next thing that will go in is our yeast mixture, and it's looking pretty much done. So I think we're ready to take that out. So let me turn off the timer. And we have about 30 seconds left anyway. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our yeast mixture, take the lid off, and we're going to pour it in here. Okay. So it should look kind of soupy at this point. Oops, don't want to. There you go. Bring it to the camera a little bit. You can see it's supposed to look a little soupy. That's okay. I've got it on a napkin here just so it's not touching our board. So let's get a wooden spoon. And we're just going to blend this together. So I'm using a folding motion. So I'm pushing the flour in and of itself, on top of itself. And I'm moving the liquid around in it so it all absorbs. So we're going to take this pretty slow, especially because I'm using a bowl that's pretty full right now, as you saw on the camera just a moment ago. And we're going to keep doing this till all the liquid is absorbed, and we'll add some other stuff a little later. Now, I try to be very careful with my measurements this week. I know usually I advocate that, like, oh, you can, it doesn't matter if there's a little extra here, a little extra there. This recipe is a little bit more of an exact science, so I've tried to be very careful with my ingredient amounts, and I hope you are too. All right. So just a little bit more. And by the way, if for some reason it's all sticking here, just get yourself a spatula or use your hands and push it off. So I'm going to get a spatula real quick, and we'll get back to going. Sorry, we'll get back to kneading. But you can see, even when it's sticking on the spoon there, that it's actually coming together quite nicely. So that's all right. It's okay if that's like that. So we'll just set this aside. We're likely to use it again. All right, so you can see now a nice shaggy dough has formed. That's nice, isn't it? Just move that around a little bit. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to pour in 3 tablespoons of olive oil. So I'm going to do this in 2 sets. All right, so this is going to add some liquid, but also some flavor. We're going to be using a lot of olive oil, so you definitely want to keep your olive oil out. We're going to use it for painting. We're going to use it to help rise. So that's the reason that in the shopping list this week, I didn't put an amount of olive oil. Because although we're putting 3 tablespoons in our yeast, in our dough, we're going to be using it for a lot of stuff. So important just to keep a good amount of it on here. The other thing we're going to do is we're adding salt, but again, the salt isn't a specified amount, so we're just doing it to taste. I'm going to put in about a tablespoon. This is approximately a teaspoon. Okay. So we've got that. Let's just move this around, and we're going to mix this around until pretty much it's a smooth dough. So the oil should help bring some of that liquid there, get our dough to incorporate nicely. And again, if things are sticking together, just take a second and move them off. Remember, we are also going to do a regular knead with this. We're going to do a regular test to make sure it's kneaded appropriately. But for now, we're just doing it in the bowl. And you're going to hear it squish a little bit. That's the sound of the oil. Nothing wrong with that. Now, in the recipe provided, they actually say to do the kneading in the bowl, but I don't like to knead in a bowl. I feel it's very restrictive. You can see here that I'm kind of running out of space. But also, more than it being restrictive, I find you just don't get as even as a knead on it. So this has mostly come together. You can see there's a little bit on the sides here, but for the most part, this is together. So what we're going to do now is clean our spoon, and we'll use this to clean our bowl off. Again, if you don't have a spatula like this to clean your bowl and your spoon off, just use your hands. You're baking this. It's going to be all right. All right, so let's move this here. And then I'm taking about an 8 cup of flour. Actually, a little less than that. I'm just going to lightly, very lightly flour our board here. You'll see in a sec when I move the bowl. Actually, let me just move the bowl real quick so you can see. So see how lightly that is? It's just a very tiny little layer of flour. We can always add more, right? Start with a little bit. All right. So let's turn out our dough. Wonderful. Look how beautiful that's already looking. So we're going to knead this, and it's going to look so much better. But for now, it's still looking pretty good. I mean, it's come together quite nicely. And I think you're going to find that because we're using warm ingredients, warm room temperature ingredients, it's going to come together really well. So usually I'd tell you that if you're kneading, you can knead something to a certain temperature. So for example, 80 degrees is an optimal temperature for your bread to start to rise appropriately. This bread is actually already going to be that temperature, so that's not a reliable test. We'll need to use the window pane test for our kneading this time. So let's do it. Just rotate, right? Pull and push like we always do. And you'll see with your dough, and you can almost see a little bit in mine, that it's not that smooth. It looks like there's a lot of different textures going on. The whole point of this kneading process for this bread anyway is not to develop gluten, because we're not really worried too much about that. I mean, we want gluten development, but it's not a bread that relies on that because it's being cooked on a stovetop instead of in an oven. So really what we're doing here is we're just trying to make sure the dough is smooth and tacky. So in the recipe it says to do this for about 10 minutes. If you want, you can set a timer. Personally, I'm just going to kind of guess and check. I actually find that's a much better way of doing it. I feel like if you do it for a timed amount, you might over-knead or you might under-knead because you're just kind of confident that it works. You'll feel that your bread is ready. So I can feel in mine that there are still little chunks of flour and little chunks of salt, and it's definitely not smooth yet. But it'll get there. But you can see that it's tacky. It's not sticky, right? When I put my hand on it, I lift it up, it comes right off. So we're already in a good place for how it should feel on its surface. We just want to make sure now that the rest of it is feeling right. Now, if your dough doesn't look as big as mine, remember I doubled my recipe. I've got about a kilogram of flour in here, where you should have about 500 grams of flour, unless you also doubled the recipe. All right, so I've used up all the flour on my surface here, but I'm still not there yet. I'm pretty convinced. So let's get a little bit more flour. And same thing, light coating. And just keep going. It should feel nice. It should feel warm. If it feels smooth throughout, if you feel like everything's kind of incorporated, there's no more kind of craggles with your dough, then you probably know the drill at this point. Do a quick window pane test. If you don't know the drill at this point, what you're going to do with your bread, I'm not ready yet, so I'm not going to do it right now, but what you're going to do with your bread is you're going to roll it up into a ball, or as much into a ball as you can. Then you're going to take your thumb and forefinger, make an L next to the top of your ball. You're going to press in and press down on your dough, and you're going to take a little ball. You're going to squeeze it so that a little ball comes off the top, and then you're going to take that ball. You're going to smooth it out into a pancake using your thumbs and forefingers, and you're going to stretch it slowly but surely like you're making a pizza, and hold it up to a light source. The window is fine. A light bulb is fine. Just hold it up to something that emits light, and stretch it so thin that you can see the light coming through it. Now, if it doesn't break before that happens, then it's perfect, and you are ready to go. If it does break, it means you are not yet ready. You need to go back to kneading. You don't have enough gluten development yet. All right. So I actually think we are close. So what I'm going to do is our test, right? As I showed you, thumb and forefinger, squeeze that. Take our thumbs and forefingers, stretch it into a pancake, move it towards the light. Okay. And oh, we are breaking through. So you know what that means. We need to do more kneading. So we are not done yet. As you're kneading, especially with a dough like this that's already very supple, make sure you're getting nice long stretches so you're actually stretching the dough out. Making sure it's actually doing the work. So that you're actually doing the work to make sure that your dough is getting nice and glutinous. We want it to rise well, because we want to have enough for our 6, me for my 12. Make them into, and then we'll shape them together. And luckily, they don't rise as they shape. So I'm actually going to move the camera when we, after we do our politics section. And we're just gonna, shape them. Oh, sorry, I'll move the camera after we shape them. We'll move over to our cast iron, which I'll have preheating. And we'll go. We'll just go from there. We'll make one together. And after that, you guys can do the rest on your own. So I know this bread recipe is a very different type of bread recipe than we're usually doing. I'm just gonna add some flour real quick. If you have an exotic bread that you would like to make or have never made before, or just want me to make for you, send us a message. I'd love to hear from you. Or send a chat, right? Tell us that you're watching. And tell us what bread you'd like me to make. If you have a recipe that you want me to try, that you've either been afraid to try, or you just want to try with someone else, send it in. I'd love to make it. We are all about trying new breads here. The show is named Let Them Eat Bread after all. And also, if you feel that the way that I'm describing my recipes, isn't making it as accessible as they could be, please let me know. I'm more than happy to accommodate anyone who might need it. No puns intended on the needing. All right. So we're going to try this one more time. So I'm going to use the dough's inherent stickiness here, create a rough ball, stretch it out a little bit, take my thumb and forefinger, push down, squeeze a little ball off, and then take that ball, use my thumbs and fingers, make it into a nice flat pancake, stretching little bits all the while. You don't want to tear it, right? Because this is a delicate process. Oh, we might be there soon, guys. Let's take a look. Yeah, look at that. That is lovely. All right, I can see the light coming through there. You can't see my face, but you can see the light a little bit, right? Coming through. Yeah. So this is done. So we're gonna roll it up to a ball like we always do. Hands like this, cupped underneath. We're gonna slowly let the dough ball own stickiness, turn it into a nice taut ball. All you're doing is letting the dough move itself back and forth here, so it's nice and taut. All right, we're almost there. You can actually see the ball is acting on me, is acting, staying more in one place, I guess is the right word. It's nice and taut on top. So I have a little bit of extra flour here, so I'm just gonna rub the flour on the bottom so this is easy to pick up. So the next step is to let this guy rise. So what we're gonna do is I have a glass bowl. As always, I'm going to warm my bowl a little bit just so the rise is a little bit better. If you do not have a glass bowl or using a bowl that stays more or less at room temperature, you're just going to plop this in. You're going to put some olive oil in your bowl. Just give it a nice quick coat, a very, very light coating. Use your hands, spread it around, and then we're going to roll our ball in it, plop it in, let it rise. So let's do it. And if you are rinsing your bowl, you just want to make sure you do it just till it doesn't feel cold anymore. You don't want your bowl to be that hot. Feel free to wash your hands while you're there. All right. Gonna wipe down our bowl. Really don't want it wet. We do want it warm though. So let's just give this a quick wipe down. And again, your bowl shouldn't be hot. It should just be warm or room temperature. All right. So we have our room temperature bowl. What we're going to do now, I'm going to put in a little bit of olive oil here. I'm just going to stir it around. If you find you need more, that's fine, but you should not need very much. You're really just doing a very basic amount of greasing on the bread. All right, so we got a little bit in there. If you have some pooling at the bottom, don't worry, you'll roll your bread in it. So let's take our bread, plop it in, we're gonna roll it once, and just make sure it's covered in olive oil. Again, this is just to make sure that nothing dries out as it rises, which is very important. If our bread dries out, it will no longer rise. So it'll form a little bit of a crust on it, and it won't rise at all. So we're now going to cover this and set a timer for an hour. So I'm going to cover it with a sheet of plastic and then a towel. I suggest you do the same. Obviously, if you have reusable plastic or you just want to use a towel, you can do that too. I use plastic and a towel to keep the heat in, to keep the heat nice and sealed in. But if you have reusable plastic wrap, or you have a lid or some other thing that will keep the heat in, use that instead. Obviously, we don't want to waste as much as possible. One thing I will say is that if you are using a lid, just don't close the lid all the way, or else halfway through your rise, your bread will explode. Your bread won't, but your lid will pop off. because the yeast is eating the sugars of the flour and creating carbon dioxide, which creates air pressure, which pops this off. This is porous enough that it's not going to pop off. All right, so we're going to let that sit for 1 hour, and we will be, and let's talk some politics, shall we? Just clean up a little bit, take a second, clean up the workspace. All right, let's see what's on the whiteboard this week. All right, so we're going to be talking about a couple of things that I was supposed to talk about last week. I don't know if you saw, but last week, unfortunately, I had to move the camera around because we were making something on the stovetop, and then we were going to move to the counter here. And because the layout of my kitchen, it's difficult to do this with one position with one camera. So I muted myself to move things around so that you couldn't hear all the clunking, and then I forgot to unmute myself. And lo and behold, I talked about 3 subjects without ever actually recording them. So I was just standing up there and talking, but you couldn't hear me. So I got rid of those, and we're going to talk about them again this week. Hopefully we don't have that issue. I am going to check right now just for funsies. We are not muted. Thank goodness. Hey, it's a learning process, right? It's only week 7 of this. So the first I want to talk about is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I'm sure most of you have heard by now that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was put on pause for distribution after in 7 patients, a rare blood clot was found. So why is this a socialist issue? Why is this a workers issue? So there's a bunch of things that I think are important here. The first one, obviously, is that we are in a race against the clock to vaccinate the world because of, every day that goes by, it becomes more likely that the virus mutates into a mutation that is not prevented by vaccines, right? So, these viruses are mutating all the time. One of the reasons that the flu shot that you get isn't always perfectly accurate is because the flu, as a virus, mutates so much that scientists are attempting to predict which mutation of the flu will be the dominant one that people get sick with that year, and that's the flu vaccine that they give out. So, there's some guessing process there, but you can still get a flu that is not immune. Sorry, that you are not immune to, right? Because there'll be a mutation of the flu that year that can't be resisted by the flu vaccine that was administered for that year. There are so many flu viruses that we just don't have one vaccine for all flu viruses. People are working towards it for a vaccine to kind of end influenza infections, but we're just not there yet. It just mutates too quickly, which is why we have to get an annual flu shot, right? So this is a concept we pretty much all understand. With COVID, it's very similar. So right now we have 3 or 4 vaccines that are being handed out in Western countries. There are additional vaccines being created in India and Russia, but they're not in widespread circulation yet. But there's this, and of course there's the big fight about whether or not we should get rid of the patent protections for vaccines, that countries who don't have the intellectual property can create genetic variants of the vaccine so they can vaccinate their people so that we can speed up the vaccination of the world and get rid of COVID, right? All this kind of makes sense. So the first issue, of course, with pausing the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is that we get to a place where we have one fewer vaccination type that's floating around, right? That's it's being distributed. And actually, I believe that there was discussion this week to let go of the pause, and that news about that may come as soon as next week. It may have already broken. If it has, leave a comment below, and I will make a correction next week. But so again, because this virus is so new to us and there's so much we don't know about COVID, it could mutate at any time. We don't know what the conditions necessarily are for it to mutate. So we are working against the clock to get rid of the COVID variants that we have now, that are susceptible to the vaccine, that can be prevented by the vaccine. So if we're putting on pause one of the vaccines, we are slowing down ourselves in this race. And it really is a race, because every day we go by, someone could get infected and have a mutation occur within them that is resistant to the vaccine, right? We just don't know. And because of that, it does seem at least a little, it's definitely hindering us to, as a species, to pause this. The other thing is, too, at the time the vaccine was paused, it had been given to about 7.6 million people, and about 7 people had these rare reactions. So the odds of you having a reaction by that logic is about 1 in a million. That's not quite, go out and buy a lottery ticket odds, but it's not that far off in comparison to other things you do. I think you got the same chance of being eaten by a shark or something like that. I'm just pulling that out of the air, so don't quote me on that at all. But it's very, very rare, right? So I think it doesn't make sense to do that. And actually, it gets to a part of our healthcare system that is a little revealing. So in the United States, we have a very individualistic culture, a very individual-centered culture. And this is just another way that we're showing that, which is to say that we saw that in a few patients, this particular thing happened. And, quote, in an abundance of caution, those were Dr. Fauci's words, we were pausing the vaccine. I don't think that makes sense. And look, I'm not a scientist and not a doctor, but I think at this point we're saying that the outcomes of a few are more important than the vaccination of the many. And that, to me, shows that we have a patient-centered approach as opposed to a system-centered approach. And for something like a pandemic that's very easy to spread, that kills hundreds of thousands of people just in the United States, we need a system-centered approach, right? Everything that we've done so far with the vaccine, with the virus, has not been system-centered for the most part. It's been individual-centered. So, it just kind of reinforces that our system cares more about individual outcomes than it does about systemic issues. So, what is the solution here, right? I'm just ranting about something. The solution here is to say to doctors throughout the country, or through like the American Medical Association, or through other medical associations that exist in the United States, to say, hey, if you see a patient with these types of blood clots, ask them if they got the J&J vaccine recently, and then from there, these are the types of tests you can do, these are the types of things you can do, this is the way to kind of fix it, to make it better, right? That way, in the extremely rare case that someone has one of these blood clots, they can go to their doctor, they more or less have in mind that, hey, I got the J&J vaccine recently, I feel like I'm having these issues, the doctor can examine them and find the clots and hopefully get rid of them very quickly. And again, this occurs very, very rarely, so this isn't likely to come up a ton of times, which is why it makes more sense to allow people to go to their doctors and to tell them about this issue. Now, of course, that brings up the whole other issue of we don't have a system-centered healthcare, which means which is to say we don't have universal healthcare. It's actually very difficult for people to go see a doctor, especially when they're feeling sick, especially if they're worried about how much money it's going to cost them. Of course, COVID testing and COVID vaccines are free, but any side effects, of course, will be paid through your normal insurance. And then, of course, not everyone has insurance, so that's a mess. I totally get that. And I appreciate that that's necessary. But again, the risk is so small that I do not think it necessitates closing off one avenue to vaccination when the side effects are so, so rare. So it's very upsetting to me that that's the way it was done. Hopefully, by the time you're seeing this, the vaccine will already be back being shipped out places and being given to people. I myself got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I got it last week. That's what I tried to tell you when I when I couldn't talk, unfortunately, or when I was muted. But I didn't have those, and personally, I've had some health issues in the past, where a blood clot would be a little scary to me. So I reached out to people that I knew who were doctors and kind of asked them about my risk levels. And again, it didn't happen to me, right? I had a 1 in a million chance. So I think at this point, this issue might be a little bit moot, but I did want to talk about what the pausing of the J&J vaccine means generally for how it reflects on the American healthcare system, but also why I think it was such a bad decision to do, even if it only lasted a week. That's a week full of appointments where people could have gotten vaccinated, where people could have been inoculated against this virus. It's 1 week that we're going to have to wait for Americans to be fully inoculated. And I just want to emphasize how much it's a race against the clock, and we don't know what the clock is ticking at, right? We simply do not know how much time we have to inoculate the whole world before there's a variant that comes about that is resistant to the vaccines. And one more point I want to make before we do this, before I end this segment. If a variant of COVID-19 comes around that is resistant to the vaccine and it becomes a dominant variant, we're back to square one. We're back to lockdowns, we're back to quarantines, we're back to universal mask mandates. We're back to people not eating out in restaurants, all this stuff, all these things that we didn't like, all the parts of COVID that we thought, oh my God, this is the worst. We literally have to go all the way back to square one if we don't get rid of this. And the way we get rid of this is to vaccinate the world. And the way we vaccinate the world is to get these vaccines to as many people as possible. And we don't do that by pausing one of the main vaccines being distributed in the West. So the next thing I wanted to talk about here is what is the deep state? So this conversation is a little late because the Trump presidency isn't really a thing anymore, but there are still politicians every now and again talking about the deep state. So I wanted to talk from historical context. What is the deep state? Where did it come from? What does it mean? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it nefarious? And I hopefully I can convey to you that the deep state, it is a thing, but it's not this big, scary, nefarious thing necessarily in all cases that it's made out to be, right? It's not this shadowy room full of people, in smoke rooms making decisions instead of the elected officials. That's not really how this works, okay? So let's start at the beginning. Where did the term deep state come from? So it actually comes from the last century when Germany was uniting, a century and a half ago, when Germany was uniting from all the principalities, think Prussia, Bavaria, and all those, was uniting into Germany. Sorry, a little later than that. So after World War, yes, I'm sorry, my apologies. After World War I, the monarchy in Germany fell, and the Weimar Republic was born. We all know how the Weimar Republic ends, but bear with me for a second. So when the monarchical administration of the country was transitioning into a democratic regime, into democratic administrations, there was questions about how you would continue the functioning of state, how you would, you'd still need a lot of the positions that existed under the monarchy. You just give them different instructions, right? So instead of officiating ceremonies having to do with transitions in the monarchy, you'd have elections, right? But a lot of the same people were still involved. You still had your tax collectors, you still had your post people, you still had your construction workers and your dock workers and your tariffs ministers and all these things, right? All these people who are just regular bureaucrats in the system, they're working for the king, the emperor, and the country was transitioning to democratic rule. And so it was just going to be like those positions still needed to be filled. Like people still needed to do those jobs. And in order to keep the state functioning, you needed skilled bureaucrats. You need people who knew what they were doing, who'd done the jobs in the past, who were skilled, because these jobs do take a tremendous amount of skill and knowledge to do, and you can't just throw away the entire bureaucracy and expect your state to work. The Soviets actually learned this very early after the revolution, when they tried to get rid of all the bureaucrats and put in party party individuals as bureaucrats, it didn't work well because they didn't know how to handle the levers of state. So that's what the deep state is. The deep state is simply the transfer of bureaucrats from one regime or administration to another regime or administration. And in the case where the term first came about, the deep state was the ministers and bureaucrats and low-level employees of the government that existed in the monarchy, who also continued to do their jobs in the democratic administrations of the Weimar. So, moving forward to today, is there a deep state in the United States? Of course there is. So, this is going to, and I don't mean this in any nefarious way or whatever, but like an excellent example of, quote, the deep state is an individual like Dr. Fauci, who has served under many administrations, who has simply just held a job in the federal government doing his professional work that he is licensed to do, giving his professional advice and things, and just doing science from one administration to the next. He's not a political person. He's not a political appointee, right? And there are gazillions of Dr. Fauci's out there in terms of individuals who stay in the government between administrations. This is the deep state. And in the United States, it's the entirety of the civil bureaucracy, right? So it's from post people to staffers at the Pentagon, right? And everyone in between, the tax collectors at the IRS, the enforcement lawyers at the CFPB. They're just everywhere, right? They're everywhere. And by the way, this isn't just a US federal issue. This also exists at the local and state level, where although there are lots of people who are elected into office in both of those places, there's also staffers who work underneath them who make sure that the administration of the locality or the state or the federal government continues to run smoothly, and they simply work from one administration or from one election to another without care much for who's in charge. Now, the people in charge can still give them instructions, right? In a sense, the deep state is a machine. It functions the way it's told to, and if it's told to function a different way, it will function a different way. Now, there is some frustration that some portions of the American deep state do have more power than simple bureaucrats or people who are just kind of like being told to do something and do it, right? And oftentimes that is in the military, so it's oftentimes in the military where there is more influence from the rank and file up on the higher level bureaucrats, right? So, and especially those bureaucrats that can be replaced, so the Joint Chiefs of Staff who can be appointed and who serve at the pleasure of the president. So, there's definitely some concern that they have more influence than they should as bureaucrats, or they have more. The military has some more influence on the bureaucrats for bad policy than they should. But, and that's a fair criticism. And if there is a criticism like that, it should be pointed out in a very specific context. The truth is, as far as the deep state as a whole goes, they don't have much power. They're not moving things around. They're not defying the will of the political actors. And although they have some protections, right, civil servants typically have protections, at least in the United States, and I think other countries as well, from being fired, except for certain reasons. They don't have the power to change public policy per se. They just execute the public policy that's been laid out. Now, what I'm trying to say is that conspiracy theories about like, oh, the deep state is doing these things against the president, yada yada, it doesn't make sense because they just don't have that kind of power. And if they were to try and do something against the will of the politicians and the directors who are politically appointed, oftentimes that would be a for-cause violation for which they could be fired from their job, right? So hopefully I've been able to explain that the deep state is not big. It's not big. It's huge, but it's not nefarious. It's not evil. It's not inherently political. It's not after an ideology or whatever. It simply is the individuals who continue to let the state function between administrations so that the country continues to function regardless of what's happening at the political level, right? The politician's job in terms of the deep state is to program them to execute their political will, right? So if a politician's in office and they appoint all their secretaries and undersecretaries, the purpose of those undersecretaries is to assign work to the bureaucrats, the quote-unquote deep state, who will execute the vision of the politician who's elected, right? And on it goes. But those people aren't, they're not out there for an ideology. They're not, secretly controlling the U.S. government and making it do bad things. Oftentimes, it is just that they're doing what they're told, and that's it. So I hope you understand that the deep state is not this scary, nefarious thing that's like evil or secretly controlling our politics. It's not. It's simply the people who allow the government to keep working even when administrations switch or when politics is slow. So the next thing I wanted to get to from last week that I didn't get to talk about was it's time to end the Afghan War. So there was some noise from Joe Biden about the possibility of getting out by September 11th, 2021. And a total troop withdrawal, like every U.S. soldier getting out. Now, some information has come out that's a little bit more wishy-washy on that he might send it to private contractors instead. But for now, the plan on the table looks like get all the troops out by September 11th, 2021, on the 20th anniversary for the cause of the war, which would be a great thing. We've been there far too long. We spent far too much money there. There is one little caveat here, of course. Trump, as you might know, Trump had made an agreement with the Taliban to get out by May. I don't remember the date exactly, but I think it's the end of May. Don't quote me on that, but it's sometime in May. To get out by sometime in May. But it was only a partial troop withdrawal. We were going to leave soldiers there, but that was out in the open. At least what Biden's talking about right now doing is having all the troops come out, like all American presence in Afghanistan come out by September 11th of this year, which would be great because in case you needed reminding, we've been there for about 20 years. There is no longer any sense of what victory is, what winning is. Afghanistan has essentially become the new American Vietnam. It's just a sandier, drier, more explosive version of Vietnam. Now, Vietnam wasn't great either, but this war has lasted much, much longer. Although we haven't had as many casualties on our side, we've killed almost 2 million Afghan civilians. We've caused untold loss of life. We ran out of bombs a couple of times when we were bombing Afghanistan. We dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan under the Trump administration, which, if you don't remember, is the single largest non-atomic weapon that we had. And we totally destroyed that country, and it's time for us to go. There will never be a perfect time for us to go, but that's not an excuse for us to leave. We created the conditions that have made Afghanistan worse. So we cannot use that to justify our continual staying in Afghanistan. It's not morally right, and we are essentially being the colonizers that we had declared our independence from in 1776. And there's actually an interesting point about Afghanistan that I want to talk about. Afghanistan has a nickname in history. I believe it's known as the Graveyard of Empires. And it's because when people have tried to invade it, they're not going anywhere. This has been true in history. The most recent example, other than the United States, was when the Soviet Union, tried to invade Afghanistan for oil and its mineral wealth. Recent report came out saying that there was trillions of dollars of mineral wealth in Afghanistan. Makes you wonder why we're really in Afghanistan. But so the Soviets invaded, a couple decades ago, and they just couldn't take it. There was no way they could take it, and it was a money suck. It was a giant money pit. They tried putting all these resources in it. Sounds familiar, right? The United States doing the same thing, and they could not tame Afghanistan. So really, it's a waste for us to be there, and we've caused so much damage. It's also the moral thing to do to leave. And as I said earlier, there is no sense of what victory is, right? This really is the new Vietnam. This is the forever war. If you remember when Lindsey Graham ran for president, he was interviewed. I think it was on 60 Minutes. I think it was, And they asked him, when do you get out? And his response was, oh, you don't get out. Essentially admitting, no, we stay there and colonize forever, right? And by the way, when we were in Afghanistan, the amount of oil that we were getting in the United States went up, right? So we were definitely kind of looting its natural resources, which is morally wrong, especially because the untold amount of damage we did to the people, as well as the millions of people that we killed there. So it's time for, so all in all, and we've been there for 20 years. All those reasons combined, it is time to leave. I really do hope Joe Biden does this. It's super important that we start withdrawing from these places, that we end our forever wars, and we stop trying to be this colonial power, this imperialist power, especially when we don't have adequate civil services back in the U.S. Right, there are still lead pipes, and there are still lead pipes in Flint. Our infrastructure is terrible around the country. Right, there's so much more we could be doing, spending our national attention on, spending our resources on, our people resources. Right, imagine if the U.S. Army went out to every community and helped build bridges and helped repair roads and built new pipes, built new water pipes, planted trees, right? Imagine how we could transform this country if we took all the energy and resources that we were spending in Afghanistan, we brought them home to help America become a better America. More trees, more roads, more bridges, more parks, better pipes. We could have so much more if we didn't spend gazillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars fighting wars that will never end, that we cannot win, which we're essentially just doing to steal as much wealth from these countries as we possibly can. So it's time. Do it, Joe Biden. You will make the left happy, and you'll be a hero. Honestly, not even gonna lie. So definitely do that. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little more in the direction of like personal politics, which I try not to really get into. I don't really like to talk about individual politicians. I like to talk more about policy, and kind of educate on policy and talk about what policies are being considered and whether they're good and bad and things. But this is a topic that I think is actually really important, because I think Americans who consume mainstream media, and this isn't necessarily a knock on them, but it kind of is. Americans who consume corporate media are told all the time what a politician's considering. Such and such a politician is considering doing this. They're considering doing that. And first of all, I want to point out that whatever a politician's considering, it doesn't matter. No one cares. It's not important. Okay. The other thing is, it's a trick. So what do I mean by that? So the reason I say that what a politician is considering is a trick is because oftentimes their office or someone they know or someone they trust has leaked this to the media to see what response it gets, right? This is what's called A/B testing. You test multiple messages, what you're considering doing, you see which one is more popular, and you go with that, right? So a politician may consider multiple options on something and see what the reaction is in the media, see what the reaction is amongst the people, see what the reaction is amongst their donors, most of their donors. But the idea is, oh, like maybe I'll do it, but there's no commitment to it, and there's definitely no fight behind it. So, media, don't tell us what a politician is considering. No one cares, okay? You might think they care, but they don't. The only thing that matters that a politician considers doing is when that consideration becomes action, when they actually fight for something. They introduce a bill, they make a speech on the House floor, they start harassing their fellow legislators to do the right thing on an issue. They fight for it, they pass it, or they actually get the thing done. If a politician doesn't do that, what they're thinking about doing, what they're considering doing, what they might one day do, doesn't matter. It just does not matter at all. It is a waste of time. It's a waste of energy because people get their hopes up, right? And maybe they shouldn't. Maybe there's like a media literacy thing in there. But the thing is, part of media literacy relies on the media, right? So the media has to be smarter than to say, oh, well, such and such a politician is considering such and such a thing. No, call them out. They said, oh, this is just A/B testing. right? They really should say, well, a politician is trying to figure out how his donors and his constituents will react to this thing if he does it, instead of the politician's fighting for something. That's the only thing that helps regular people, is if a politician is fighting for something or if they actually get the damn thing done. Other than that, no one cares what they're thinking about, and no one should care what they're thinking about. What goes on in the politician's brain, I don't give a shit. No one cares, okay? The important part of politics, let me just kind of step back for a second. Politics, if you just look at the root word, poly, right? Policy is in there, more or less. Politics, policy, they're all related, right? The point of politics is to enact policy. So if you're not enacting policy, if you haven't accomplished policy, then what you're considering, it doesn't help anyone. You're there to help us. You work for us. The point of you even having this power and authority is to do what you said you were going to do in the campaign and to adapt to new circumstances and to make our lives better as citizens. That's it. That's all you're there for. You're not a celebrity. You're not, what you're considering doesn't matter. You're not meant to be, a star. People aren't supposed to. It's not about any of this other stuff. It's not about the glamour. You're supposed to be a boring ass politician who just does what the people wants you to do. That's it. Don't do what your donors say want to do, unless your donors are the people, which they should be. Small dollar donations. Get money out of politics. Get big money out of politics, I mean. But yeah, what a politician is considering doesn't matter. And I wish the media would stop reporting about what politicians are considering, because it doesn't change anything. A consideration doesn't change anything. And I know in my last segment, I talked about Biden was considering the pullout from Afghanistan. And the reason I ended that segment with "Do it, you'll be a hero" is because the consideration is useless to me. Get the troops out of Afghanistan, right? Do the things that you're considering doing. Don't tell us you're considering doing them. Just do them. Just do them. That's what you're there to do, okay? No one cares about anything else that you do. Just do the policy. Just execute the policy that the people want. Okay. Sorry. It's a little ranty on that one. But I think that story is important. Next thing I want to talk about is raising the refugee cap. So what is the refugee cap? So first of all, I just want to I want to give a little bit of perspective here. So a cap, think about a cap very similar to like you think about a quota system. It's essentially, it says you may take this many and no more, right? We use quota systems in terrible ways in this country. We had quotas for Jews, we had quotas for Chinese people at different periods in our history, and essentially it said, it was essentially a cap. But whether it's a quota or a cap, it's the same thing. It says you may take this many, but no more. And recently, Biden came out and said that he was going to set the refugee cap at 15,000, which, by the way, is where it was in the Trump administration and is far, far too low. But he was going to diversify the countries from that they would come from. This is super important. That line is bullshit. Essentially, what is going to happen is that there are going to be lots of little quotas for lots of different countries, and very few people from very many countries are going to get to come here. Okay? This is problematic for a number of reasons, but the most important reason, and the reason that I really hope sticks at the end of this segment, is that the United States is the primary reason around the world for most of these people having to leave their homes and come here. Okay? We created the issues in Mexico. We created the issues in Central America. We created the issues in South America. We created the issues in the Middle East. Okay? Those are where the refugees are typically coming from. We created those problems. For us to then turn around and say, so for us to, on the one hand, displace hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and then turn around and say only 15,000 of you can come here to the land that essentially forced you to leave your homes, is barbaric. I don't care if Trump does it. I don't care if Biden does it. I don't care if, God's self comes down from the sky and does it. It's barbaric. It's immoral. It's wrong. Okay? If we cause a problem, it is on us to fix it. And fixing it in this case, we may never be able to repair those countries to the way they once were, which is a shame. And I wish we had not destroyed these countries and these areas of the world to the extent that we have. But We have to let them come here when they come here. There should be no refugee cap. We should let everyone through America's doors. The Statue of Liberty, bring us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. Why are they yearning to breathe free? Because we bombed their homes. Okay? Let them in. I don't care what country they come from. Sure, people need to be verified. I'm not saying you should just let any Joe Schmo walk across the border, okay? But what I am saying is we should not be imprisoning them at the border. We should not be saying that only so many can come here. We should be evaluating everyone who wants to come to America, see if they're going to be a danger to this country, and that's it. None of this means testing about are you going to be a public burden. That's Trump with the public burden rule. That has to be repealed yesterday. None of this, you're the 98th person from your country to come and we're only accepting 97, so go home. None of that. We have so much room in this country to bring in new people, to work new jobs. There are tons of jobs that Americans don't want to work that have to be worked. I'm thinking specifically of fruit harvesting in the South, Georgia especially. There are, immigrants bring so much good to this country, whether they're coming here voluntarily as immigrants or they're coming here involuntarily as refugees. We need to welcome them. One, because it's the right thing to do, and two, because oftentimes we are the reason they're coming here. So a 15,000 refugee cap is insulting, it's barbaric, it's cruel, it's hateful, it's everything that we pretend America isn't. Okay? So in order for us to right the wrong of the Trump administration, we need to close down the ICE detention facilities. We need to abolish ICE, most likely. We definitely need to abolish ICE. Go back on that. We definitely need to abolish ICE. And we need to allow anyone who wants to come here, after being screened, to come here and live here and have a life here. Because it's the right thing to do, and because we're the cause for most of these refugees. Sorry, guys. Getting worked up with some of the topics today, but they're very important. Hey, let's switch to a lighter story. We've got some time left. So I want to talk about, this week, Tuesday, I think it was 420. Happy Weed Day to everyone. I know it's a little past then, but happy 420 to everyone who have 20ths in their Aprils. And also, I hope you enjoyed your Weed Day. Today, also Tuesday, like every other day, would have been a great day to end the drug war. So we know now that the drug war was a political maneuver by the Nixon administration to criminalize their political opponents, black people and white hippies who were liberals, right? The drug war was a farce. It was a scam. At this point, not only are those things true, but we've had multiple presidents admit that they have used drugs that you could be put in jail for, that are, that are war on drugs. And these politicians, they get to power and they close the door behind them. So it was okay for them to enjoy the drugs, but it's not okay for regular people to enjoy the drugs. Okay? And by the way, when I say ending the drug war doesn't just mean tomorrow we legalize all the drugs. That's not just the only thing we should do. We should take the Portuguese model. We should decriminalize or legalize all drugs. We should set up safe injection sites. We should set up clinics for people to test their drugs to make sure that the drugs that they're getting aren't laced with something that could harm them. People are going to get high no matter what, okay? The war on drugs has created more drugs and more death, and it's created the cartels. There's a whole bunch of ills, social ills, that the war on drugs has created, including mass incarceration, right? One of the big ones. And by the way, note to Joe Biden, you were a big, big fan of the war on drugs. You put lots of people behind bars. When you helped write the 1994 crime bill, you said you'd make it a death penalty for everything except jaywalking. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. It's on C-SPAN. He did say that. Okay, so Joe Biden, you have some reparations to pay here about people. Some reparations to pay here about people who you helped lock up. So, what's the solution to the drug war? How do we end the drug war in an equitable and fair manner? So the first thing we do, as I said, legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs, all of them, all recreational drugs, okay? At and that includes one we don't like talking about a lot: meth, heroin, all of them. Regulate them all. Okay. By the way, when you do that, what ends up happening is people set up legitimate businesses. They get licenses. They get inspected. They pay taxes. All these things that help them become better businesses. And then if there's a dispute, you can take them to court, right? You don't have to worry about getting shot in a back alley because you disagree with your drug dealer. Your drug dealer has a store. It has an address. It pays taxes. It sends you adverts in the mail that you throw out. Recycle. Right? Like, we create an economy. And by the way, we generate tons and tons of money. First of all, for regular people, but also for the governments. Local governments can get, there's a ton of money in there. We can use that money to improve our country, yada, yada. Okay, so first thing we do, legalize, tax, regulate all drugs. The second step, and this is way more important than the first, but first has to get done. We let everyone out of jail who we imprisoned for the use of these drugs. Every marijuana conviction, every intent to distribute marijuana, every intent to distribute conviction, all drug-related convictions. Obviously, if you're in there for a violent crime, you killed someone over some weed, you definitely need to stay in jail. But I mean, for those people who were just arrested for distributing drugs, for dealing drugs, for taking drugs, we have to let them out. And by the way, letting them out isn't good enough because they were imprisoned for an incorrect and immoral reason. Sorry, guys, dry throat today. They were imprisoned for an immoral reason. So what do we do to make them whole? We have to pay them reparations. So I think the best way to pay them reparations is $24,000 per year they were incarcerated. And, if they were only in jail for like, a year and a half or 10 and a half years, obviously you can delineate, you don't have to give them a full year if they only served half a year, right? But we have to pay these people so that they can get back, into society, so they can participate in the thing that they were charged for. And the last thing is prioritization. Those people who were punished, for those communities especially who were punished for using these drugs, need to be first in line. To be able to sell them and make profit off of them as part of the reparations to them for the amount of time that we locked them up behind bars. That's how we truly end the drug war in an equitable fashion. That's how we really pay reparations to those people who we harmed during the drug war. That's how we end the culture of the drug war, the legacy of the drug war. And by the way, while we do that, we're going to end a lot of the cartel. By doing that, we're going to end a lot of the cartels and other trades in other countries where we've created violence through our drug war. So, happy belated 420, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, today would be a great day to end the drug war. All right. So, back to serious stuff. So, as many of you saw this week, and perhaps are breathing easier for the first time in a very long time, Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all counts. Thank God. Where do we even start with this story? So one, George Floyd should never have died, right? That's obvious. He should still be alive. No one should die for using a counterfeit $20 bill. Just shouldn't happen. You can add it to the long list of things being done while black that will get you killed. It's fucked up. There is no good reason why George Floyd is dead. And I do want to point out, many people have seen this at this point, but while essentially more or less while they're reading the sentencing out of Derek Chauvin in Minnesota, a 16-year-old girl was shot to death by police in Ohio. So the fight isn't over. And this, by the way, what happened, the conviction of Derek Chauvin, it's not really justice. Okay, it's accountability. Derek Chauvin is being held accountable for his actions, but this isn't justice. This isn't a just system. And by the way, this doesn't even prove that our system creates justice, right? This was a very rare thing in America where a white cop was convicted for killing a black man, a black person. Doesn't have to be a man. And by the way, to that end, this was the first time in Minnesota history, in their whole history, that a white cop was convicted of killing a black man. So, I don't have a ton of commentary to add to this, but I do want to talk a little bit of what a just system would look like. And I don't have all the answers, and there's lots of people who are way smarter than me who have solutions to these problems, but a just system looks like cops don't shoot someone because they're black. A just system looks like if you need mental health help, you get it. People with guns don't show up. Justice looks like every time that someone is wrongly killed. First of all, a real justice, a system that really executes justice, that people aren't killed by cops. Cops aren't supposed to kill people, okay? They're really not. Quite frankly, I think at some level we have to talk about disarming cops, allowing them to have their weapons in their car, but not on their person, or something like that. Obviously, that's a limited reform, but possibly we could talk about taking all their firearms away. A system that was truly just would not allow people to get killed in police custody for crimes they didn't commit. They wouldn't let people get killed in police custody for crimes they did commit. There are so many names, and this small measure of accountability isn't justice. A just system would make sure that in any case where anyone was killed in police custody, that officer would be in jail forever. And look, there's a whole conversation about prisons and all that stuff, but I don't want to have that talk right now. Right now, I just want to talk about how our system is unjust, which is to say that the system that we have allows for people to get killed when they should not get killed, and allows police to get away with it. Of course, one of the obvious solutions to get rid of police qualified immunity, and I will hopefully do a segment more on what qualified immunity is. I'll talk more about how immunity works in the legal system. But for now, I'm glad that Chauvin's guilty. It'll never bring George Floyd back. I wish George Floyd was not dead. I wish that all the individuals who were wrongly killed by police were not wrongly killed by police. Yeah, my heart goes out to the families of those who are losing people at the hands of police. This shouldn't be happening. This system is not justice. This verdict is not justice. This is accountability, and only a tiny measure at that. So the next thing I want to talk about is, so this is kind of a nuanced issue. So I want to kind of talk through all the bases. So many of you know about the Federal Trade Commission. I'm sure you've heard of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which operates kind of in that sphere with them. And the Federal Trade Commission was created by an act. It was created by a law that was passed a while ago. I believe it's called the Federal Trade Act, FTA, I think it is. And so the FTC, their purpose is to go after deceptive behaviors by companies for anything, really. It's deceptive advertising, deceptive practices, saying essentially if you're lying to consumers, the Federal Trade Commission can go after you. And in that, the Federal Trade Commission has the power to what's called enjoin you. So enjoining is a legal term which means to stop someone from doing. The term injunction comes from there. Injunction is to stop someone from what they're doing. stop someone from doing what they're doing. So there's this section in the Federal Trade Act. I think I have the name of that right, but if I don't, just correct me here. 13B, and 13B of this act says that the Federal Trade Commission, for deceptive and unfair practices, can impose permanent injunctions on corporations or on entities who are deceiving consumers. Okay, sounds great. And by the way, the FTCA has done a lot of good work. Payday lending is something they've tackled. The CFPB had a little bit more power to do it, and they were doing things related to financial crimes. But unfortunately, the CFPB has more or less been made toothless thanks to the Trump administration cutting all of its money. Hopefully, Biden will give it its claws back, give it its funding back, and put people on it who are actually going to enforce it. It's a great organization. They do really great work. They've returned billions of dollars to consumers, and there are lots of fraudsters out there, so they really need to be doing that job with the FTC. So the FTC sued this company called AMG, and essentially they're a payday lender. If you don't know what a payday loan is, good. But also, so a payday loan essentially is you go into these places, they're typically set up in poorer neighborhoods, and they say, look, if you pay me, you go into a payday loan place and you say, hey, I need a loan, and they say, okay, well, we'll cut this loan against your paycheck. So you just give your paycheck to me. I'll give you the equivalent of your paycheck now, and just when you get paid, you pay me, and we'll be even, right? That's the idea. Problem with payday loans is that the interest rate because these the loan turns around in 2 weeks, the interest rate is incredibly high. The interest rate for payday lenders is like 600% or something like that. So they can make a tidy profit on an interest rate even in 2 weeks. So, excuse me. So they can make a tidy product even in 2 weeks. So you get to this point where it's essentially a scam, right? You will essentially forever be in debt to this company. There is no way that you can ever pay this back, and that's kind of the point, right? So it traps you in debt more or less forever, even though it seems like an easy way out, and it'll be easy to pay back because the loan just grows exponentially. Like every day, every week you don't pay it back, it grows by a lot because the interest rate is just so high. So this is a payday loan company, and they were sued by the FTC. And what the FTC was trying to do was, one, permanently enjoin them, and I just told you what that was. So essentially, to permanently stop them from doing this particular payday loan scheme. But also, it said, hey, you've robbed people of all this money. We're going to require you to give it back to the taxpayer, right? There was a fine in there. It was a pretty hefty fine. My guess is, with most FTC fines, you see that the fine is not nearly as high as it could be, as it should be. It doesn't really stop. Sorry, let me put it another way. It's not really equivalent to the amount of money the company made, right? So, like if they made $100, the fine might be $1 type of thing, right? Obviously scaled up, but they get the general idea. If they stole $100 million, they might get fined $1 million. They made $99 million profit off that. Obviously, that's not a deterrent, right? So, anyway, that aside, there was a fine. The idea was that this company was going to have to pay back all this money, and that it would be used, either it would be distributed to individual taxpayers, which sometimes happens, or it's just used for the FTC's enforcement, and they're able to bring that money into the Treasury to be used for whatever it's going to be used for, right? And this is usually a really positive thing. Unfortunately, this week, the Supreme Court pretty much gutted the FTC's ability to bring justice in these cases, because it said that Section 13B does not allow for the FTC to seek monetary relief. And relief, by the way, is just a legal term for what you can get out of, like a settlement in a sense. It's just an amount of money that the company pays to to make up for the wrongdoing that it's done. That's what relief is. It's just an amount of something given to the people who are asking for something because they've been wronged, right? You ask for relief from your wrong. So the Supreme Court essentially ruled, and unanimously too, and quick aside here, I know we're getting into the weeds with this issue, but I think it's important. So Supreme Court precedent, it has gravitas, which is just sense, like it has a weightiness to it, right? It has a power to it. It's less likely to be overturned. But the only way that typically happens is cases that are, the more justices side on the side of the opinion that's being written, the less likely it is that the opinion will be overturned in the future. So this opinion was a unanimous opinion, which means that this decision is almost impossible for this decision to be overturned by the court, right? The court is very unlikely to do this. Luckily, the Federal Trade Act is a law which allows for the Congress to come in and change the law and right the wrong of this decision. And by the way, this 100% is a bad decision. From a legal perspective, I don't actually know if it's the wrong decision, but the FTC has been doing this for a long time. They've been charging people money for committing wrongs against the American people, and there hadn't been an issue more or less up till now with the section of the act. And this act is fairly old, as I mentioned earlier. So the worry here is that this ruling is going to make it very hard for the FTC to do their job, because Congress has been incredibly slow about moving anything right now, and I doubt that an amended version of the Federal Trade Act is going to get through. Two, this was a unanimous ruling, so the likelihood the Supreme Court will take up a similar case and rule the other way is very, very small, if not impossible. And three, in the meanwhile, these companies can scam people, and the most that the FTC can do is say, hey, you have to stop doing that. But if you're a bad guy, or bad gal, or non-binary person, and you are scamming people out of all their money, and you get to keep all that money, and the only thing that happens when you get sued is they say, hey, you, stop doing that. It's bad. And you're like, okay, fine, I'll stop doing it. But you've already run out the back with all the money, right? You already have all the money. So it's not really a punishment. It's essentially say, hey, enjoy your early retirement with all that money you stole, right? So, and look, FTC fines typically aren't nearly high enough, but that's an issue for another day. For now, this is an important issue. It's an important worker issue, because the people who are getting scammed by these scams, that's fine. Sentence is fine. The people who are getting scammed are typically working class people. They're regular people who get tricked into giving away their Social Security number, or they're tricked into taking a payday loan when they can't afford one, or like during the housing crisis, buying houses they couldn't afford, right? These scams are directed at working people. They're collecting these scam fees little bits at a time, but just from lots of working people. So if the FTC can't return that money to you, then at the end of the day, even though they've told the scammer to stop, a lot of them are corporations. They can just fold up shop and set up another corporation so the scamming can continue. Also, they've run out the door with all the money. And third, and I think perhaps most importantly, is us, the regular people. We're already out of that money. We've lost it already. We are still in that terrible position that we were in, where we don't have money because it's been scammed away from us. So this decision is actually really, really worrying for me personally as a lawyer, but also just as a consumer, right? We need to be super vigilant. There are lots of scams going on right now. Lots of COVID-19 related scams. So please be careful who you give your money to. Be careful who you give your ID to, because it looks like the watchdogs have essentially been defanged on behalf of corporate America. And it's really disappointing. And I hope that there are some really strong laws that are passed soon, although I can't say I'm particularly hopeful. But in the meanwhile, be super careful with your information, be super careful with your money, and hopefully we don't get scammed. Because if we do, there's no one coming to save us, unfortunately. All right. right, so our timer is ready. Holy moly. Okay. Our bread has more than doubled in size. Look at this. Look how beautiful this bread is. Wow. Wow, this grew way more than I thought it would. Okay, this is great. Okay, let me wash my hands real quick because I've been touching a lot of stuff, and then we are going to roll this out. It's gonna be great. I'm so excited, guys. So excited. Holy moly, can you see this, guys? This is amazing. This is so cool. All right, so we're going to take a tiny, tiny bit of flour, very, very, very tiny. I'm going to spread it very, very, very thin because we really don't want this making a ton of flour. So, yeah, we don't want a ton of flour to pick up on this because we want our dough to be nice and soft and delicious, and the flour will toughen it a little bit. All right. Wow, look at this. I know I keep saying that, but come on, guys. Isn't this beautiful? All right, so let's turn our bread out. Boop. Wow, look at that. Look at that. So what's nice about this recipe is it doesn't rise twice, so we can actually just start working on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut mine into 12. You'll cut yours into 6, but the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just chop it in half. Now, typically, I would weigh these out, but quite frankly, I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to change this into a log, and I'm going to cut 6 pieces from it, and then we'll roll those out. So let's just make these into nice logs here. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. All right, let's do it again. 1, oops, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so we have 12 of these. They look great. All right, so we're gonna put them on the side. I would actually roll them up into balls. Take just real quick, roll them into balls. This is gonna make them easier to roll out. You don't need to knead them. Can if you want to, but don't need to. Just make sure you got a nice little ball going on. It doesn't have to be pretty. All right. Because it will not matter once we put it on the heat. All right. Roll these up into a ball. Remember, we're going to flatten these guys out, so don't worry about if your ball is pretty or not. Some a little bit bigger than others. That's okay. This one's gonna be a tiny one. That's all right. You know what? That's what we'll do. We'll make this one. You can see make a tiny one, and the rest on camera, and the rest of them we'll do. The rest of them we'll do other time. We are gonna cook them all now. I'm not gonna cook them all on camera, but you are gonna cook them all now. All right. So we've got our little ball here. Flatten it out a little bit, and we're gonna take our rolling pin. We're gonna put a little bit of flour on there. A little bit of flour on this guy. And we're just going to roll out. Okay, so these are going to be a little oily, right? So just make sure you got a nice little floured surface here. So just roll them out. You want to roll this nice and flat. You probably want this to be about 1/8 of an inch. You don't want it to be too floury. We are going to wipe off the excess flour. So if there is excess flour on yours, it's all right. So while we do this, let's preheat our cast iron. not going to move the camera today. We'll just what we'll do is I will show it to you as I do it, and we'll go from there. All right, so you should see now you have a nice flat dough, right? Very, very nice. And so there should be a tiny, tiny bit of flour on it just to stop it from sticking to the board. It should be about 1/8 of an inch thick. Don't lubricate your surface. You don't need to do it. It's not going to stick. At least it shouldn't. You're going to want a pair of tongs to flip this. And you're going to want your paintbrush if you're using it. If you do not have a paintbrush to use, a spoon is great, or you just use your fingers. Recommend a spoon though. So this is going to get very hot. So while that's waiting, let's stack them on this plastic. Let's fold the plastic in. Yeah. Put it on here for now. We can move the next one. We can start doing the next one. A little bit of flour there. And again, you will wipe off all the excess flour. So if there's a lot of flour on here and it looks like you're going to have a lot of excess flour, don't worry about it. You're going to get rid of it. Well, let's move this out of the way. This will be a nice big one. Try and keep it a circle to the extent you can. If you can't, that's fine, but it'll be easier, especially since your skillet is probably round. Keep it a nice round shape. Just flip it over, let's move it around with flour. Remember, we are going to wipe off all the excess flour, so don't worry about it too much. All right, this is gonna be a nice big one. So this will be great for a sandwich. This one, the little small one over there, will not be so great for a sandwich, but that's okay. We're making them different sizes. If you want them all to be the same size, that's fine. You probably would have had to measure them out. All right. So again, you want it to be just about 1/8 of an inch in size, and to kind of hold that roundish shape. If it sinks in a little bit, really not the end of the world. All right. So that's getting pretty hot. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this. We're going to put it on our cast iron just until it starts to get a little bit of a crust on the bottom. Now's a good time to hit your fire alarm. You want to do that now. Sorry about the noise. So once you have a nice crispy bottom on here, and I'll show you what that looks like, we're going to flip it over. It'll expand a little bit. We're just going to cook it on each side for a couple minutes so it has that nice char on it. And it should start to bubble a little bit too. This will start to smell really nice, okay? So while it's going, I'm going to get a plate out so I can show you how I'm going to decorate the one I'm going to make on camera for you guys. All right, this is smoking. All right, you can see I have a little bit of color on it, but it's not done yet. So we're going to keep it on there. And I'll show you here once this is ready. So remember, you're using very high heat, so just make sure that you're checking on this often. You don't want it to get too dark, but you do want it to get kind of that nice brown color on it. And as soon as you have it there, you want to flip it over. All right, so you can see it got some nice brown color on it now. You can see. We're going to flip it over a couple minutes. And it should pop up a little bit. Don't worry about little black bits on it. The char is actually really, really tasty. And this is only going to need about 2 or 3 minutes on each side. So just keep watching it, and you'll see. And by the way, if it doesn't get to black, that's fine too. It doesn't need to be black to be cooked. Just make sure that it's nice, that you've got some nice brown bits on both sides, and that it no longer feels like dough when you're picking it up and flipping it. If you're worried that it's not done, let that brown cover a little bit more of your baslama, and then once you do that, you'll know it's done. But even if you just have some nice brown on the outside, it's going to be okay. It'll still be cooked. All right, so I've got a little bit of black on mine. I'm going to turn my heat down just a little bit because the cast iron is very hot. The cast iron is great because it will stay hot once it has been made hot. So once you've got it heated in there, it'll stay pretty hot, so you don't have to keep it on that super high heat the entire time. All right, so this is done. Look at the beautiful color on that. Isn't that gorgeous? All right, so, and if you tap on it, it'll feel kind of hard, right? It won't look like dough anymore. Gorgeous. So what we're going to do is we're going to decorate it. So I've got my piece of baslama right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of our olive oil and just we're going to put a little tiny bit on there. It's a little too much, but that's all right. Don't worry about it. So if you're using a spoon, just use the back of the spoon. If you're using a paintbrush, just paint it a little bit. Flip sides, you can take some from here. If you put a little bit too much on, like me, just paint it back. You just want a nice little layer of olive oil on there. Nothing crazy. I put a little bit too much on, so just pour slowly, but this isn't exact science. There's no perfect amount to put on there, okay? So now we've done that, and by the way, this is looking delicious. Look at that. Look at that gorgeous olive oil sheen on there. All right, so the next thing we're doing is add our spices. As I said in the shopping list, I'm going to be using 4 delicious spices today. I'm going to be using some garlic powder. Let's put a little bit of that on. I'm using a little bit of onion powder. And all this is to taste, guys. You can put on as little or as much as you want. This is all about how you want it to look, how you want it to taste. Put some thyme on. Yeah, that's really beautiful right there. And then last but certainly not least, because some people in my life love to have some heat, I'm going to do chili flakes. Look at that. Look how beautiful that looks. Isn't that great? So this is going to be the end of our video. I've just shown you how to make it in your cast iron. I'm going to eat this off camera with my family here. But I highly encourage you to make the rest of yours as soon as you can. And remember, to save them, put them on a plate, set them aside, let them cool to room temperature. You can do it on a rack, you can do it on a plate, however you want. And then once they're completely cooled, put them in a Ziploc and store them in a bread bin or somewhere that doesn't fluctuate temperatures too much and is covered from the elements. And when you want to eat these during the week, what you're going to do is you're going to take your cooked ones, you're going to throw them on your cast iron for like a minute on each side, just enough so they get hot. And then you're going to do exactly what I just did. Paint it with olive oil, put on your favorite herbs and spices, and you will have a delicious baslama bread to eat anytime you want. All right, guys, I will see you next week. Thank you so much for watching, and take care. Have a good one.